when we read last, Brandon and a few of the Knot were just about to, they had arrived at the Mergenthaler Street station, and they were just about to go into the station and see if they could find the kidnappers in Peony. So here we go. Chapter 26, Mergenthaler Street. It wasn't roots hanging down from the ceiling, it was iron. And it wasn't just there on the platform, it was everywhere. It had wrapped around the banister of the stairs like ivy. It had altered the arrangement of the overhead lights so that fixtures that had once been flush against the ceiling now hung at awkward angles, their electrical wiring twisted around iron armatures that had clearly not been part of the original design. It had wound its way through the steel gate that had closed off the service tunnel and platform from the upper levels of the station. As they approached that gate, at the bottom of the stairs heading up from this platform to the transit level above, Marzana uttered a curse. In the twin beams of light from Brandon's and Amelia's flashlight, it didn't look like it could possibly open, not with all that extra metal tangled in the hinges. But the conductor was unconcerned. He merely reached into his pocket, took out a ring of keys, selected one, inserted it into the keyhole, and gave it a twist. With one gentle shove, the gate swung open without protest. "Lights off," Brandon said, just in case. The staircase was wide enough for two people to walk side by side, but they went up single file in the dark, with Marzana following Brandon and the others following her, each holding the hand of the next. About a dozen steps from the top, Brandon stopped. They crouched and listened. Nothing. Or wait. Yes, it was almost inaudible, but there was a noise coming from somewhere up there. Or maybe not even the noise itself, but the echo of it, bouncing through the cavernous station. Not quite a thump, not quite a scrape. Marzana glanced at Brandon. "That's coming from the concourse," he said. "I'll admit, I thought this was all a bit far-fetched, but it does sound like someone's doing their best to reopen the station." "I can take a look," Mitty offered. "Do some reconnaissance." "There's another couple gates between here and there," Brandon said. "Won't cause you trouble, will they? Or the iron? Isn't there a thing about iron and ghosts?" "Oh yeah, there is a thing about iron and supernatural things, isn't there?" Mitty said thoughtfully. She shook her head. "I've never noticed any ill effects from it, and the gates shouldn't be a problem. We're not talking about solid doors, right? As long as my reliquary fits through some part of the gates, I can pass. And unless our kidnappers turn out to be someone I've already shown myself to at some point, I'll be perfectly invisible. Mars?" Marzana took the reliquary vial from her pocket and held it out. "Go to it." "Ah, Mitty," Brandon beckoned her over. "You're about to see some things, love. But no need to worry, all right? It's perfectly safe. Apart from the kidnapping bad guys, I mean." Mitty hesitated. "What are you talking about?" "The old iron," Brandon said. "The wild stuff. It's been at work up there." "I know," Mitty protested. "We all know that." Marzana gestured at the tendrils twisting and twining all around them. "That's the point, isn't it? That's how this whole situation came about?" The conductor shook his head. "Whatever you think you know about the wild iron, from having seen it on the surface, is nothing compared to what it is underground." He touched a warped coil of metal that projected root-like from between the bricks of the wall. JJ and Amelia edged back away from it. "Even this is nothing," Brandon said with a half-smile. "They didn't shut down this entire system because of a few small eruptions and disruptions and places where the iron decided to contribute to the decor. They shut it down because there were places where the iron ran rampant. One of those places is right above us." He clapped Mitty's shoulder. "It's nothing you need to fear, but, well, you'll see. It's perfectly safe, though." Mitty frowned briefly, then appeared to remember that even without Brandon's assurances of safety, she was a ghost, and as far as they all knew, past harm. "All right, back in a minute." She darted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, and paused only a moment at the top to reach through the bars of the next gate with the hand that held the reliquary. Then she stepped through and was gone. With flashlights still off, they climbed the rest of the stairs and crouched silently behind the gate to wait for her return. Moments passed, 2 or 3, then 2 or 3 more. Marzana resisted the urge to look at her wrist. It was too dark to read her watch anyway. JJ shuffled his feet. Amelia elbowed him. Marzana bit down on her tongue to keep from shushing them both. So far they'd heard nothing at all from whatever was above them, but just in case. At last, Meddy reappeared in the dark on the other side of the gate, with an expression of shock and wonder on her face. "You weren't kidding," she said. "Better forewarned, though, right?" Brandon asked with a grin. "Do we need to be whispering?" Marzana asked a little impatiently. Meddy shook her head. "I don't think so. Not yet, anyway." JJ and Amelia sprang backward to make room as the ghost passed the reliquary between the bars to Marzana. "What's it like up there?" JJ asked hesitantly. "You'll see," she said breathlessly. "But I found the spot, the place where our baddies are trying to come through. There's a staircase to the surface that leads to nothing but a rough ceiling. Only the ceiling's actively in the process of falling apart. Dust falling, clumps of mortar or cement or whatever. You can see metal mesh and bars, but I didn't see light coming in yet." "Maybe we can get up and into some kind of strategic position before they're through," Marzana said. "Are there places to hide?" "Oh, sure," Brandon said, selecting another key from his ring. There were going to be a bunch of retailers on the concourse level, shops and snack bars and whatnot, plus ticket counters, a waiting area with benches and tables and stuff, lockers, you name it. The infrastructure is all still there, just, well, let's say it's been reconfigured." "That's one way to put it," Meddy said grimly. "He's right, though. You'll see. We have plenty of options. I'll show you." Brandon unlocked the gate. He and Amelia switched on their flashlights, and Marzana took hers from her kit and turned it on as well. Then they all stepped through and found themselves in the center of a platform on the transit level, the beams revealing a floor patterned with blue tiles in repeating wavy lines, broken by the occasional image of a brown water wheel. Marzana aimed her light upward and found signs marking the track tunnels to either side as Riverline Coupe de Grace and Riverline Inlet Pale. Here the sounds of the break-in were clearer and more insistent. Then Amelia said, "Whoa." She swung her light to either side along the track bed on the Inlet Pale side. "You guys!" The tracks there, rather than lying flat, rose up off the ground in uneven, canted, and undulating waves, like the tracks of a roller coaster. In places, they were held up from below by rough pillars of iron, and in others, they were suspended from above by iron chains of bizarre and mismatched links. Marzana turned her flashlight on, the Coupe de Grace side where the track had been torn up entirely. The rails and ties used to build a curious, skeletal thing that made sense to Marzana only as some kind of sculpture. "It gets weirder," Brandon said, waving his flashlight toward a staircase farther down the platform. "This way." "I wish we had more light," JJ commented. "If we knew the layout better, the rest of us, I mean," he amended, glancing at Brandon. "This dark might be an advantage. But as it is, it doesn't help. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do in terms of creating distractions if I can't see my surroundings." They started up the stairs. "I can help with that," Brandon replied. "There's a control room on the concourse level. I can't bring the place up to full power. That would set off alarms at the power grid, but there's an emergency system that's powered by a generator." "Actually, I think that'll work in our favor," Marzana said. "Wouldn't you be freaked out if you broke into a space that was supposed to have been deserted for decades and found lights on?" "They're going to freak out anyway," Meddy muttered with a relish. "It's nuts up there." There was no gate at the top of these stairs, and even in the dimness, Marzana could feel that they had emerged into a large, wide-open space. The murk had a different feel to it, and the sounds of deconstruction were even more pronounced. For a moment, though, Marzana completely forgot about the kidnappers as their lights glanced over the effects of the old iron's interference in the station's concourse. The fact that they could see only glimpses and shadows made it all the more peculiar. A big arrivals and departures display on one wall had been converted into a vertical metal garden, where each of the click-clacking tiles that had once flipped around and around to show a number or a letter had been repurposed as the petals of a flower on an iron stem or a succulent cupped by iron leaves. The folding, padded chairs that had once been bolted to the floor in the waiting area now hung from the ceiling at uneven intervals, each suspended by chains on either side like a swing. They swayed ever so slightly, creaking gently, even though the air was perfectly still. The big circular information desk near the center of the space stood 6 feet off the ground, held up by a massive iron tree shape, as if the desk were part of a tree house. Huge appendages that somehow managed to look less like branches and more like tentacles spread above it, reaching both outward and upward into the high-ceilinged darkness overhead. A big gold clock that had probably stood over the desk was now embedded in the metal trunk and peeked out like the face of an owl that had been surprised by Merzana's flashlight. JJ glanced at his watch. Either this just happens to be one of the 2 times a day that clock will be right, or it's keeping perfect time. There's a corridor over there, Mitty said. The beam of Brandon's light swung off to the left, splintering into shadows as it passed through a collection of freestanding staircases and ladders and ladderless slides that appeared to have sprouted from the floor like beanstalks, and that stopped in midair, supported by and connected to nothing. "Oi!" he snapped. "Warn me first before you grab my arm, would you?" "Sorry." Mitty relinquished her grip. "All right, wait here, and I'll get some lights on." With his beam, Brandon picked out a small hallway closer by and stalked toward it, his toolkit swinging in one hand. Amelia played her flashlight around while they waited, picking out curious pockets of ordinariness here and there. Near the information desk, in its tree in what had once been the central waiting area, a collection of chairs and small formica-topped tables stood, neatly squared up to one another and apparently untouched. Here and there, yawning pits in the floor surrounded on 3 sides by railings marked the staircases to the various platforms on the transit level below, all of which had been kept free of obstructions, as if at any minute commuters might spill out and need clear walkways. All around the perimeter were the empty shops, like gaps in a mouth where teeth had once been. The iron seemed to have left them alone, too, though wherever the ring of shops was broken up by restrooms, all the plumbing, pipes, toilets, sinks, everything, spilled out of the entrances in nonsensical and obviously not to code configurations. And still the echoing, yet oddly muted sound of someone methodically breaking away the ceiling somewhere out of sight continued. "We were right," Merzana thought. "I can't believe we were right." Excitement warred with fear. She glanced at Amelia's shadowed face, and the blonde girl shot back a quick, tight smile in response. Now what? There was a strange whirring from the hallway where Brandon had gone, and then the entire space flickered once as a handful of old, hissing emergency lamps flashed to life, illuminating pockets of the concourse but leaving swaths of it still in shadow. The conductor emerged, brushing off his hands as he cut around the thicket of freestanding iron stairs and ladders to return to where the members of the knot waited. "Better?" "Definitely," JJ said, looking around appraisingly. "This'll do." Merzana glanced toward the now illuminated corridor from which the sounds of the breaking in were coming. "Let's go have a look. See how long we have before they're through. Meddy, will you take point?" Meddy rushed ahead again, darting across the concourse and into the noisy passage. As the rest of them followed, she leaned back around the corner. "They're close." Merzana sprinted forward, Brandon keeping up easily with his long-legged stride. The emergency lamps in the hallway glared down on a space almost completely taken up by a double-wide divided staircase. The same water and mill wheel pattern from the platform on the transit level repeated on the steps, which probably would have given a pretty, or maybe disconcerting, effect of water flowing down underfoot, except for the uneven layer of dust and grit sifting down onto it from above the very top of the stairs. The sounds were coming from a rough ceiling where presumably the staircase would have opened out into the street level. As they watched, bigger pieces of cement began to fall, exposing more sections of wire mesh and metal bars. A thin beam of light stabbed through from above. Dust motes swirled. Brandon put out an arm and backed them all away from the stairs as the thin beam became a wide glare. Someone above had lifted away a whole section of ceiling. With a hiss, a sparking bright dazzle flared, and a moment later, the dazzle hit the metal. "Blowtorch," Brandon muttered, herding them back into the main concourse. "No idea what they're after, have we?" Merzana shook her head, glancing from Amelia to JJ to Meddy. "I don't think so." Her friends shook their heads. "I guess the plan is just to see what they're up to and keep them there until Mom and Dad or Brandon's friends arrive." "Right," Brandon said slowly, and Merzana could almost hear his thoughts. "If they arrive. Well, for starters then, unless we want to be a welcoming committee, we need to find cover." He folded his arms and glanced around. "Somebody can take that information desk if there's a way up to it," he suggested, then pointed to an alcove near a corner. "Somebody over by the lockers there. Maybe somebody over by those vending machines too? He nodded to a different alcove just a bit farther away. We ought to have someone near the corridor they're going to come in from, in case your friends back in the Liberty do manage to wrangle us some backup. He pointed to the nearest empty shop. Since that person will be closest to the incoming baddies, I'd feel best if it was me. After ascertaining that the trunk that supported it was in fact climbable, JJ and Medi took the information desk, pointing out that since they had no idea where the kidnappers were likely to go once they arrived, the most central place was probably the best spot from which to plan distractions. I'll take the lockers, Marzana said. Amelia stuck out her tongue. I guess I'll take the vending machines. They just seem so far away. Clang! Something heavy and metal fell and proceeded to thud, rattle, clank, boom down the stairs. They're through, Medi called. Scramble! 5 people sprinted in 4 directions. Marzana ran to the alcove that held the lockers, another spot that for whatever reason the iron seemed to have left untouched. There was a whole assortment of lockers of various sizes, a handful of them still secured with combination locks or padlocks. Some of the metal cabinets were tall and thin like the ones at school. Others were half as tall, stacked one on top of the other. Some were double or even triple wide. I might fit in one of those, Marzana thought, but then I'm stuck if anything goes wrong. There were 3 banks of lockers, and she wound up simply flattening herself against the one farthest from the corridor, where the kidnappers would emerge, and easing her head around the corner. In the center of the concourse, Medi, who didn't have to worry about being seen, leaned over the counter at the information desk. She spotted Marzana and waved, then pointed into the shadows nearby, where JJ had eased himself experimentally onto one of the broad tentacle branches. Marzana nodded, then leaned out just far enough to see the stairwell passage. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, footsteps. Footsteps and a voice. This is unexpected. A slender figure, holding a flashlight and carrying some kind of pack over one shoulder, appeared, silhouetted in the light from the emergency lamps in the hallway. He, Marzana thought, though she couldn't make out the face at all, looked around the concourse. Oh my gosh! He switched off his flashlight. There was a reply from someone else, but it was unintelligible. The man stared around for a second or two more, then turned back. Will you hurry up? The quicker we're out of here, the better. Something thudded in the stairwell. More footsteps clattered down, and then there were 2 of them. Thanks to the brighter light at their backs, Marzana couldn't make out the features of either one, but she was pretty sure the second figure was also male. He was shorter and just a touch stockier than the first, and he stifled a noise of shock when he saw the iron's work in the concourse. What does it mean? The second guy said, looking around in wonder. We knew it would be weird down here. It's the light that's concerning, the first man said. Who's out there? He shouted. Nobody here but us ghosts, Medi called back from her post at the info counter. The 2 newcomers couldn't hear her, of course, but it was all Marzana could do not to erupt into nervous giggles. You know you're trespassing, the tall guy called after a moment. That's Rich coming from... Medi's voice broke off. Crap, did he hear me? Can you hear me? She shouted. Everybody held their breath. He can't hear me, she said. After a moment's pause, he's just doing that thing where you yell into an empty room, just in case. Nobody panic. Another moment stretched. Then the man who'd shouted turned to look at his companion. I think we're alone. I bet there are motion sensors or something that tripped the backup power. Did they have motion sensors back when they built this place? The stockier one asked dubiously. Never mind. Like I said, the quicker we're done, the better. Plus, if there is somebody down here, they don't want to get caught any more than we do. Here. He shrugged off his shoulders. He shrugged it off his pack and shoved it into the other guy's hands. It looked practically empty. Interesting, Marzana thought. They're here for something they expect to be able to carry out with them in a backpack. Something small. He reached into his pocket and took out a piece of paper. 152, he read. Then he looked up, glanced around, and pointed directly at Marzana. Or directly at the locker alcove anyway. From where he was standing, he certainly couldn't make out the numbers. She ducked back out of sight and glanced at the 2 nearest lockers. You've got to be kidding me, she thought. Desperately, staring at 150 and 151, she cursed silently. The locker they were coming for was in this aisle. Quickly, she noted that 152 was one with a padlock on it. Why would there be locks on any of these if the station never opened, then tiptoed as fast as she could toward the back of the row, where there was nothing but wall. The aisle didn't connect with the next one over. Her heart thudded. She could hear the approaching feet, but the concourse was so big, so open and empty, that she had no idea how close they were. Marzana bent, opened the double-width locker closest to the wall, and squeezed herself inside it. She hooked her fingers into the vents, pulled the door closed until she figured it would look shut, but stopped before it latched in case she needed to get out fast. She held her breath. "Marzana!" She clapped both hands over her mouth, but it was only Meddy's voice, speaking through the vents. "JJ and I are on it. Get ready to run." "Their locker's padlocked," Marzana whispered back. "'Kay," Meddy replied. "Amelia has lockpicks." She vanished. The footsteps neared, then stopped. A small squeak of metal, then a clatter, as if one of the men had lifted the padlock and dropped it again. "Why couldn't he just have left us the key?" a voice griped. "That wouldn't have been in the spirit of the thing. I still say this was supposed to be a game, not, you can knock it off right now about this stuff." That was definitely the taller guy. "It's done. We're here. The picks are on the outside pocket. Hand them over." Zip! Fabric noises. "You can get it open, right?" "I think so," the other voice said, but it didn't sound particularly confident. "I've got wire cutters if we need them, but who knows how the thing is rigged. It looks like an ordinary padlock, but I didn't come this far just to ruin everything by getting impatient." "Hurry up," Marzana thought. "JJ, Meddy, whatever you're doing." There was no reason to think the kidnappers would have any interest in the locker she was hidden in, so Marzana was pretty sure she was safe for the moment. But if her companions could get the two men away from the alcove somehow, maybe Amelia could do a little lockpicking herself. Thank goodness Brandon had chosen the shop all the way over near the exit stairs for his hiding place. Marzana could just imagine what the responsible adult would say if he had even an inkling of what she was considering right now. But if it worked, potentially they could trade whatever was in that locker for Peony's safe return. "This pick isn't working," the tall kidnapper said, annoyed. "Pass me that toothy one." "The rake?" "Whatever it's called. Gimme." "It's not actually how a rake works," the stocky kidnapper said after a moment. "As I understand it." "You want to try it?" snarled his companion. "You did spend the whole trip here practicing," or he stopped talking abruptly, interrupted by an audible fizzle that was followed by an explosion of light, so bright the flash made it through the vents of Marzana's locker. "Here we go." Chapter 27 is called Pas de deux. That's a French pas de, looks like pas de ducks, but it's called pas de deux. Okay, we'll see what happens in a minute.